The cost of being unknown to yourself. They don't fear losing you because you don't even know what they'd be losing. You've been giving away parts of yourself to people who never even stopped to see what they were receiving. You've been shrinking not because they asked you to, but because a part of you believed you had to become less, to be loved more, and somewhere along the line, you forgot who you were. Not because you were weak, but because no one ever taught you that your wholeness is terrifying, that your truth has weight, that your silence speaks louder than begging ever could. So you became what the world wanted, and they loved the version of you that disappeared on command. But now you're waking up. Why you let them treat you like you're replaceable? Let's be honest, it's not that they didn't love you. It's that you didn't require it. You were too available, too forgiving, too unsure of your own value to make them realize you were the kind of person they'd regret losing for the rest of their life. Carl Jung said, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Why? Because self-acceptance shatters illusions. The illusion that you need their approval to be whole. The illusion that love is earned through sacrifice. The illusion that being chosen by someone else makes you worth choosing. But here's the truth. You will never be feared for what you pretend to be. You will only be unforgettable when you fully become who you already are. And that begins when you stop abandoning yourself to make someone else stay. When you become a stranger to yourself. Carl Jung called it the persona, the mask we wear to survive a world that doesn't know how to love authenticity. You crafted yours early, maybe as a child, maybe the moment someone made you feel like being loud was too much, or being quiet was not enough. Maybe the moment you saw love withdrawn, the second you stopped performing. So you adjusted, smiled through discomfort, nodded through disrespect, clung to people who made you feel seen, because you couldn't yet see yourself. But the problem is this: when you wear the mask long enough, you forget you're wearing one. You stop noticing the disconnect. You begin to confuse familiar pain with real connection. You mistake anxiety for love, silence for security, control for care. But deep down, something aches, because deep down, you know, this isn't who you really are. Self-abandonment, the root of rejection anxiety. When you don't know who you are, you'll give people discounts on your worth. You'll excuse their absence. You'll justify their disrespect. You'll stay longer than you should because you're afraid that if you walk away, you'll lose something. But you don't realize you're already lost, not to them, to yourself. And that's why it hurts so much, because it's not just that they didn't choose you, it's that you didn't choose you. Self-abandonment is silent. It doesn't scream. It whispers. Maybe if I just give more, they'll finally see me. But people don't fall in love with what's desperate. They fall in love with what's rooted, with what doesn't flinch when tested, with what knows its worth, whether someone stays or not. That's why they don't fear losing you yet, but they will when you remember who you are. The awakening begins here. This isn't about becoming cold or detached or playing games. It's about finally realizing you were never supposed to chase what was meant to meet you, that love should never cost you your identity, that true connection doesn't require you to disappear to be loved. Carl Jung believed that transformation happens not by changing into someone new, but by remembering the parts of you that you exiled to survive. That child who was once too much, that teenager who started dimming her light, that woman who began confusing attachment with affection. Bring them home, because the more whole you become, the more your energy becomes unforgettable. And when you stand in that power, when you finally embody the fullness of your truth, they will fear losing you, not because you're cold, but because your presence no longer needs them to exist. They'll fear losing you. When you stop fearing yourself, you become magnetic. When you become whole, you don't become magnetic by chasing love. You become magnetic when you no longer need it to define you. The moment you stop begging, bending, or proving, you become someone they can't help but notice. Not because you're louder, but because you're rooted, grounded, unshaken. Carl Jung taught that the process of becoming whole, what he called individuation, is the key to psychological freedom, not perfection, not popularity, not control, but wholeness. You don't have to become more than you are. You just have to become all that you are. Healing isn't a glow-up, it's a return. We've been sold a lie. That healing is about leveling up, showing them what they lost, proving your worth through transformation. But that's just another performance, another mask. Real healing is quieter. It's less visible, more felt. It's the process of meeting yourself again, without shame, without conditions, without apologizing for what you've survived. The world teaches you to curate your image, to look confident, to post like you're healed, to speak like you've moved on. But Jung would say, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Healing is making the unconscious conscious, looking at the wounds that shaped your choices, the attachment styles that made you stay, the shadow parts of you that sabotaged love, because they never believed it would last. Healing is not a look, it's an energy, and when you truly embody it, they feel it, even from a distance. Wholeness equals emotional non-reactivity. When you're whole, you don't need to prove anything. You don't flinch when they ghost you. You don't spiral when they pull away. You don't audition for love. You observe. You reflect. You respond, not react. Why? Because your sense of worth no longer lives in their attention. People fear losing those who aren't afraid to be alone, because independence is rare, because it's easier to manipulate someone who's empty than someone who's full. And when you're full of yourself, not ego, but truth, you become powerful. Carl Jung would say, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. You are no longer defined by the roles others assign you, not the ex, not the fixer, not the backup plan, not the emotionally available placeholder for their wounded self. You are whole, and whole people are hard to forget. Stop chasing, start radiating. This is the shift, from pursuit to presence, from proving to being, from fear to freedom. You don't need to chase, because what you're chasing is often what's running. You become magnetic when you no longer carry the frequency of desperation, when you're no longer willing to pay for love with self-abandonment, when you realize that chemistry born from anxiety is not connection, it's a trauma reenactment. You don't attract what you want, you attract what you are, what you believe, what you hold within. So ask yourself, are you holding a wound, or are you holding your worth? Because when you hold your worth fully, gently, unapologetically, you don't just attract people, you attract the right ones. Wholeness isn't loud, it's undeniable. The people who fear losing you aren't afraid because you're dramatic. They're afraid because you're undeniable, because your presence requires self-awareness, because being around someone who knows who they are exposes everyone who doesn't. You're not here to perform. You're here to exist fully, to speak clearly, to love deeply, but not blindly. That's what makes you unforgettable. And when people feel your wholeness, it triggers them, it awakens them, it shakes something in their unconscious they didn't know was asleep. That's power, not because you control them, but because you no longer need them. You become someone they fear losing, because you've stopped fearing being alone. And now, for the first time, they have to face the fact that you were never the one who needed saving. You were just waiting for someone to meet you where you already stood. You don't chase love when you are love. They can't replace what they can't understand. They don't miss the person who chased them. They miss the one who stood still, unbothered, whole, unapologetically themselves. And in truth, they don't come back for someone they can replace. They come back for what they couldn't understand, what they couldn't grasp, what triggered something inside them, too deep for words, and too honest to deny. Carl Jung believed that what we don't understand in others often reveals what we haven't yet accepted in ourselves. This is why you'll confuse people when you stop conforming, when you no longer seek their validation, when you simply are, because wholeness is disruptive, not loud, not rude, but energetically confronting. Why your wholeness makes you intimidating, Jung called it the shadow, the hidden, rejected parts of ourselves that we bury to be accepted. You've done the work. You've faced your shadow. You've looked into the parts of yourself that others avoid. The shame, the guilt, the neediness, the anger, the fear. You've held them, not with judgment, but with compassion. And in doing so, you became powerful. But for someone who hasn't done that work, your presence feels like a threat, because when you are whole, you mirror back to others what they're still missing. Not because you say anything, not because you try, but because wholeness speaks its own language. You walk into a room, and they feel it. They don't know what it is, but they know they can't control it. They can't manipulate it, and that terrifies them, because people can't play games with someone who isn't playing. You stop explaining, and that's what makes you powerful. You've likely spent years explaining yourself, justifying your feelings, trying to be understood. But now, you don't need to be, because the need to be understood was born from the fear of being alone. And once you make peace with your own presence, you no longer need permission to exist as you are. When you stop explaining, you conserve your energy. You speak less, but your silence says more. You stop debating with people who never planned to see you clearly anyway. Carl Jung said, "Solitude is for me a fount of healing which makes my life worth living." And it's true, because when you know your truth, you stop offering it on clearance. You realize your energy is a luxury, not a utility. And that's when they start to fear losing you. Emotional sovereignty is rare and irresistible. There's something magnetic about someone who's not ruled by their emotions, but deeply in tune with them. You don't react. You respond. You don't threaten to walk away. You walk away if that's what protects your peace. This isn't arrogance. It's sovereignty, the rare ability to own your feelings without projecting them onto others. You no longer need someone to act right for you to feel whole. You no longer base your joy on how someone texts you back. You're not looking for another half. You're not seeking a savior. You are meeting others from fullness, not from need. And that changes everything. They'll never replace the energy that healed them. Here's the part they'll never admit. You changed them. You expanded their awareness. You touched their soul. You loved from a depth they didn't know they needed until you were gone. But because they couldn't name it, they couldn't keep it, they'll try to find you in others and fail. They'll seek the emotional depth, the calm clarity, the soulful honesty, but it won't come packaged in someone willing to lose themselves for love, because you're not that person anymore. You'll stop being the lesson and start being the standard. You don't come with an instruction manual. You come with presence, with depth, with grace, with fire. And no, they can't replace that. Not even with someone louder, not even with someone more agreeable, because the rarest people are the ones who never begged to be chosen. You weren't misunderstood. You were just too real for the ones still hiding. Real self-worth doesn't flinch when they leave. They left, and you didn't break. You bent, yes, you hurt deeply, but you didn't collapse, because real self-worth doesn't flinch, even when the person you loved walks away. Carl Jung said, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes." And this is awakening, not the euphoric kind, the real kind, the kind where you sit in silence after someone's absence and realize, I was never missing them. I was missing me. Their absence showed you your strength. What you thought would destroy you actually revealed you. You cried, but you didn't chase. You ached, but you didn't beg. You watched them try to replace you and realized they never even saw you to begin with. But now you do. Their leaving was painful, but it pulled the veil off your own eyes. You stopped asking why they didn't love you enough and started asking why you did. Self-worth isn't built through being chosen. It's built when you choose yourself, when no one else does. That's the quiet power they feel when they come back, and you're unavailable, unshaken, and interested, because now you're full. And the desperate version of you they once knew, gone. The end of proving, the beginning of being. You don't need to explain your glow. You don't need to defend your peace. You don't need to prove that you're over it, because you've outgrown the need to be seen by those who only looked at you through the lens of their own limitations. Carl Jung believed that suffering carves space in the soul for consciousness to grow. You suffered, you grew, and now your awareness has created boundaries. Where there once were begging hands, you no longer need love that threatens your peace. You no longer cling to promises that weren't rooted in action. You no longer entertain ghosts because your future is too full of light. You've stopped needing closure from the person who broke you because you gave yourself the kind they never could. You become irreplaceable when you stop repeating. They always come back, but you don't, because you've stopped the cycle. You've stopped repeating the roles they assigned you: the caretaker, the forgiver, the one who stayed, no matter how much it hurt. You've rewritten the script. Now you love with standards. Now you care with discernment. Now your empathy has edges, and that is where you become unforgettable, because you are no longer accessible to the versions of people who once depended on your self-abandonment. They don't fear losing someone nice. They fear losing someone whole, because whole people don't return to half-built relationships. You were the gift all along. Here's the truth. You were the gift, not the convenient one, not the easy one, the transformational one. But they couldn't receive it because they weren't ready. And now that you are ready, you don't need them to be, because your healing was never about proving anything. It was about remembering everything. You forgot about yourself, that you are rare, that you are wise, that your love was always sacred, not because they wanted it, but because you gave it. And now that you've stopped giving to people who can't receive, you've become magnetic to those who recognize energy as sacred currency. You are the storm and the stillness. If this resonates with you, let this be your turning point, not just a video, a moment, a decision to no longer chase, to no longer shrink, to no longer apologize for your power. Comment "I am whole" if you're claiming your energy back today. Like this video if you've ever had to rebuild yourself alone, and share it with someone who needs the reminder that wholeness isn't loud, but it is impossible to ignore. You are the storm and the stillness, the mirror and the light, the one they didn't see clearly until it was too late. Now they fear losing you because you finally stopped fearing yourself. The healed version of you is the one they never expected.